Before we begin, if you're drawn to stories where power cracks, secrets bleed out, and the truth hunts those who try to outrun it, hit subscribe, leave a like, and drop a comment. This is one of those stories that starts calm and ends with everything burning. On the night of June 7, 2021, in the low country of South Carolina, the phone call sounded like the worst kind of nightmare. A prominent attorney reported finding his wife and son shot to death near the dog kennels on their sprawling family property. His voice on the line was shaken, breathless, cracked with disbelief. He said he had just returned home. He said he had been gone. He said he had nothing to do with it. And, at first, everyone believed him. Alex Murdaugh wasn't just anyone. His name carried weight, generations of it. For nearly a century, the Murdaugh family had shaped the legal system in this quiet corner of the state. Prosecutors, judges, lawyers, Murdaughs occupied them all. Alex himself was known as a friendly, fast-talking personal injury attorney with a knack for winning cases and a reputation for generosity. He was the kind of man people trusted without asking why. So when Alex told investigators he had an alibi, it landed softly. He said he'd been away from the property that evening, visiting his elderly mother. He said he returned late and discovered the bodies of his wife, Maggie, and their younger son, Paul. He said he tried to check for pulses. He said he called 911 immediately. He said he was devastated. The scene itself was horrifying. Maggie and Paul had been killed near the kennels where the family dogs were kept, a place they frequented often. Investigators found spent shell casings and signs of a brutal attack, but no clear suspect. No forced entry. No robbery. No obvious motive. The kind of crime that makes law enforcement pause and quietly circle the people closest to the victims. Still, Alex wasn't treated like a suspect. Not at first. He was the grieving husband, the shattered father, the man whose family had already suffered tragedy. Because just 2 years earlier, Paul had been charged in a high-profile boating accident that killed a young woman named Mallory Beach. That case had put intense pressure on the Murdaugh name and threatened to expose things long kept hidden. But on that June night, it was easy to believe this was just another cruel twist of fate. Alex's alibi seemed solid. He said he wasn't there when it happened. He said he had left the property earlier in the evening and only returned after the murders. Investigators confirmed he had visited his mother. Phone records appeared to support parts of his timeline. There were witnesses who placed him away from the kennels during the estimated time of death. And so, quietly, the narrative formed. Unknown assailant. Targeted attack. Possibly revenge connected to Paul's legal troubles. Maybe someone angry. Maybe someone waiting. But something about the timeline didn't sit right. Investigators noticed small inconsistencies, nothing dramatic, just details that didn't line up cleanly. Alex's movements seemed oddly precise in some moments and frustratingly vague in others. His recollection of times shifted. Minutes stretched. Seconds disappeared. Still, none of it was enough to break the spell his alibi had cast. Then, as weeks passed, the cracks began to widen. Financial investigators stumbled onto something unrelated, or so it seemed at first. Missing money. Client funds that had quietly vanished. Settlements that never reached the people they were meant for. The deeper they dug, the uglier it became. Millions of dollars unaccounted for. Years of deception hiding behind charm and influence. Alex Murdaugh was confronted. He admitted to financial crimes. He resigned from his law firm. He claimed addiction, pills, desperation. He said he'd lied about money, but not about the murders. Not about Maggie and Paul. Once again, many believed him. Then came the roadside incident. Months after the killings, Alex called 911 again, this time saying he had been shot while changing a tire. He claimed a passing truck stopped, a man got out, and fired at him before fleeing. The story unraveled within days. Investigators concluded it had been a staged event, a failed attempt at insurance fraud that spiraled into yet another scandal. Now, the public's trust was gone. Everything Alex said was re-examined. Every detail replayed. Every assumption questioned. And when investigators went back to the night of the murders, they weren't just listening anymore. They were looking at phones, data, timestamps, and files most people forget exist. That's when they found it. A video. It wasn't taken by police. It wasn't surveillance footage or a security camera hidden in the trees. It was something far more ordinary and far more devastating. Paul's phone. Earlier that evening, just minutes before investigators believed the murders occurred, Paul had recorded a short video at the kennels. It wasn't meant to document anything important. It was casual, incidental, a few seconds of dogs and voices, the kind of clip people record without thinking twice. But when analysts played it back, they heard something that made the room go quiet. A voice in the background. Alex's voice. The same man who said he wasn't there. The same man whose alibi placed him away from the kennels at that exact time. The same man who had looked investigators in the eye and insisted he had last seen his wife and son earlier that evening, somewhere else on the property. The video placed him at the scene, minutes before the murders. There was no mistaking it. Friends, family, investigators, they all recognized the voice, the cadence, the tone, the familiarity. It wasn't speculation. It wasn't interpretation. It was presence. Suddenly, the alibi collapsed. The timeline rewrote itself in real time. Every step Alex claimed to take that night was now viewed through a different lens. Why lie about being there? Why minimize those final moments? Why insist on distance when the truth was so close? The question shifted from who could have done this to why would he lie if he was innocent? And with that single video, everything changed. What had once been a tragic mystery hardened into a focused investigation. The walls closed in. Prosecutors rebuilt the case from the ground up, anchoring their theory to those final minutes captured unintentionally on a son's phone. Everyone had believed his alibi until the video surfaced. And that was only the beginning. Chapter 2. The video didn't scream. It didn't accuse. It didn't even try to explain itself. It simply existed, quiet, ordinary, and devastating. Investigators watched it again and again, each time more carefully than the last. The dogs barked. Gravel shifted underfoot. And there it was, Alex's voice, casual and unguarded, floating through the background as if nothing in the world was wrong. That voice anchored him to a place and a moment he had sworn he wasn't part of. From that instant forward, the case pivoted. What had once been a wide, speculative search tightened into a narrow corridor. Prosecutors stopped asking who might have wanted Maggie and Paul dead and started asking what Alex had been doing in the minutes after that video ended, and why every version of his story seemed designed to put distance between him and those kennels. They reconstructed the timeline down to the second. Paul's phone activity ended abruptly. Maggie's phone went silent soon after. Alex's phone, however, told a different story, one filled with movement. Steps recorded. A sudden flurry of activity. Calls made. Messages sent. Then the drive to his mother's house, a trip he would later describe as routine, almost forgettable. But nothing about it was routine anymore. Investigators noted how quickly Alex left the property after the video was recorded. How short the window was between that final moment and the estimated time of death. How carefully his later movements appeared to create a buffer of time. Just enough space to claim absence. Just enough uncertainty to plant doubt. It was no longer enough to say he was there. Now they needed to prove what happened after. The defense would later argue coincidence. That Alex had been at the kennels briefly and left before anything happened. That the video proved nothing beyond proximity. But proximity, prosecutors knew, was power. It shattered the foundation of the alibi. And without that foundation, every explanation Alex offered began to sink. Then came the motive. At first it felt abstract, numbers on spreadsheets, missing funds buried in legal jargon. But the deeper the financial crimes were exposed, the clearer the pressure became. Alex wasn't just stealing. He was drowning. Lawsuits loomed. His law firm was closing in. The boating case involving Paul threatened to pull back the curtain on years of quiet corruption. Investigators believed the walls were collapsing all at once. Maggie, they learned, had started asking questions. She was looking into the family finances. She wanted answers. Paul's criminal trial was approaching. Depositions were scheduled. Documents were being requested. The future Alex had carefully curated. Respect, influence, control was slipping through his fingers. And then, suddenly, Maggie and Paul were gone. Prosecutors didn't paint the murders as random or impulsive. They framed them as a desperate act by a man who believed he was running out of options. A man who thought that removing two problems might buy him time. Sympathy, delay, confusion. The video, they argued, proved opportunity. The finances suggested motive. Now, they needed the final piece. Behavior. Alex's actions after the murders became a case study in contradiction. His 911 call was emotional, but oddly selective. He mentioned checking pulses, but not attempting CPR. He spoke quickly, jumping ahead, offering details before being asked. When police arrived, he was cooperative, but his story shifted subtly with each retelling. Small changes, slight adjustments, the kind people make when they're trying to remember something that didn't happen the way they're describing it. Investigators noticed how often Alex inserted explanations before questions were finished. How he emphasized certain details, like being away, while glossing over others. How he never mentioned being at the kennels until confronted with evidence that made denial impossible. When asked later why he lied about that, Alex said he was scared, that he didn't trust law enforcement, that he panicked. Prosecutors would argue a simpler explanation. He lied because the truth placed him too close to what happened next. The defense pushed back hard. They attacked the investigation, claimed tunnel vision, suggested that focusing on Alex ignored other possible suspects. They pointed to the violent nature of the crime, arguing it was inconsistent with someone trying to stage an alibi. They questioned why a man would commit such an act and then call police himself. But the prosecution leaned into that contradiction. Calling police wasn't proof of innocence, they said. It was control. It allowed Alex to set the narrative first, to frame himself as the discoverer, not the participant, to explain away evidence before anyone else had the chance to question it. And still, the video loomed over everything. In court, it played silently as jurors leaned forward. They didn't need narration. They didn't need interpretation. They heard the voice themselves. Ordinary, familiar, inescapable. Alex sat just feet away as his own words, spoken casually to his son, undid years of careful storytelling. The jury watched his reaction, or lack of one. No visible shock, no confusion, just stillness. Prosecutors highlighted that stillness. They argued it wasn't grief, it was calculation. The look of someone realizing that something he never intended to be evidence had become the most damaging proof of all. The kennel video didn't show a murder. It didn't capture violence. It didn't even show faces clearly. But it showed truth. It showed that Alex was there, that he had lied about it, and that everything he said after that lie had to be viewed through the lens of deception. By the time closing arguments approached, the case was no longer about whether the jury believed Alex. It was about whether they could ignore what they had heard with their own ears. Defense attorneys asked jurors to separate lies from guilt, to consider that people lie for many reasons: fear, shame, panic. They warned against convicting a man based on circumstantial evidence and emotional reactions. The prosecution asked a simpler question. If he was innocent, why lie about the last moments he spent with his wife and son? Why erase himself from the scene, unless being there mattered? The courtroom grew quiet as the question settled. Outside, the world watched. A powerful name, a fallen dynasty, a case built not on spectacle, but on a handful of minutes recorded by chance. Everyone had believed his alibi because it was easy to believe a man like him. But belief, once broken, doesn't mend. And as the jury prepared to decide his fate, one truth remained impossible to escape. The video didn't just place Alex at the scene. It placed him at the center of everything. And the story was no longer his to control. By the time the jury was sent to deliberate, the courtroom felt hollowed out, like a place that had given up its secrets and was waiting for the consequences to arrive. Everyone understood what was at stake, but no one said it out loud. This wasn't just about guilt or innocence. It was about whether truth could survive power when the two collided head-on. Inside the jury room, the video was played again, not because anyone needed convincing, but because it anchored the discussion. Jurors talked about timelines, finances, behavior, and motive, but every thread led back to those final minutes at the kennels. The ordinary sound of a father's voice, captured without intention, had become the most honest witness in the room. Some jurors struggled with the weight of it, not because the evidence was weak, but because of what conviction meant. A respected name, a fallen family, a man who had once stood on the other side of the courtroom, representing victims instead of answering for them. The defense had asked them to separate lies from murder, to consider fear and panic as explanations. But panic didn't explain planning. The prosecution's theory wasn't built on rage. It was built on pressure, a slow collapse, a life tightening around a man who had spent years manipulating systems designed to protect others. When jurors laid the evidence out in order, the story stopped feeling complicated. It felt deliberate. Back in the courtroom, Alex sat quietly, eyes forward. He had learned long ago how to appear calm when everything inside was unraveling. His lawyers had prepared him for this silence, the waiting, the uncertainty, the way time stretches when you can't control the outcome. For the first time in years, control wasn't his. Outside, cameras lined the courthouse steps. Reporters spoke in hushed tones, aware that the verdict would echo far beyond the walls of the building. This wasn't just another crime story. It was a reckoning for a system that had allowed one family to dominate unchecked for generations. When the jury returned, the room rose. The foreperson stood, paper in hand. The words that followed landed without theatrics, without spectacle. Clear, final, unavoidable, guilty. Alex's expression didn't break. Not immediately. There was no dramatic reaction, no visible collapse. Just a tightening of the jaw. A breath held a second too long. A man absorbing the moment he had spent years trying to outrun. The judge thanked the jury. Sentencing was scheduled. The courtroom slowly emptied, but the impact lingered. People whispered about the video, about how close the truth had been to disappearing, about how easily it could have. In the days that followed, analysts dissected the case endlessly. Legal experts focused on precedent. Psychologists examined behavior. Journalists traced the history of the Murdaugh name, documenting decades of influence that had quietly shaped outcomes and silenced questions. But for many watching from the outside, the lesson was simpler. Power doesn't erase evidence. It just delays it. The kennel video became a symbol, not of technology, but of chance. A reminder that the smallest, most unremarkable moments can become decisive. That truth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits, hidden in plain sight, until someone presses play. Alex would later speak in court, addressing the families. His words were measured, controlled, carefully chosen. Some heard regret. Others heard performance. But the court wasn't there to judge emotion. It was there to judge facts. And the facts had spoken clearly. As sentencing approached, attention turned to what came next. Prison time. Appeals. The long unraveling of a life built on deception. But beyond Alex himself, the case forced uncomfortable questions. How many times had his name opened doors that should have stayed closed? How often had influence replaced accountability? Those questions didn't have easy answers. What remained undeniable was this. The alibi that once protected him had collapsed completely. Not because of a dramatic confession or a single witness, but because of a few unintended seconds recorded by someone who never imagined they would matter. Paul hadn't known he was documenting the truth. He had just been filming dogs, talking casually, living an ordinary moment. That ordinariness is what made it powerful. It wasn't staged. It wasn't forced. It was real. And reality doesn't negotiate. In the end, the story wasn't about a dynasty falling or a courtroom drama reaching its conclusion. It was about how lies depend on distance, and how the truth destroys that distance the moment it steps into the light. Everyone had believed the alibi because it was easy to believe a man who had always been believed. But the video didn't care who he was. It didn't care about reputation or legacy. It didn't bend for power or privilege. It simply preserved a moment exactly as it happened, and waited. When that moment resurfaced, it did what no accusation could do on its own. It told the truth.